Understanding academic tone and style. Formal tone in academic writing, tips to achieve it. When writing for academic or professional purposes, such as writing a research paper for professional email to the CEO of a firm, people use diction that is far more objective, complex, and meticulous than their everyday language. In other words, they use formal language, or to be precise, language that carries a formal tone. This course will peruse the definition of formal tone in the context of academic writing. In addition, it will give some helpful tips to aid writers in writing more formally. How can you write with a formal tone in academic writing? One of the key aspects of formal tone is choosing words that are suitable for your topic, purpose, and audience. Avoid words that are too informal, vague, emotional, or biased. For example, instead of saying the results were awesome, say the results were significant. Use specific and accurate terms that reflect your research and analysis. For example, instead of saying the data shows, say the data indicates or the data suggests. Check which terms are most commonly used, identified in the academic field that you are writing for. Make sure to use synonyms so as not to overuse the same words unless you are researching and introducing a new concept in your field. You have to use standard grammar and punctuation. Another important aspect of formal tone is following the rules and conventions of standard grammar and punctuation. Avoid using contractions such as don't, can't, or is. Use full forms such as do not, cannot, or it is. Avoid using informal punctuation such as dashes, ellipses, and etc. Use consistent verb tenses, subject-verb agreement, and pronoun reference. Avoid using first person pronouns such as I, we, or my. Use third-person pronouns such as he, she, they, or they. Use passive voice sparingly and only when appropriate. How can you write with a formal tone in academic writing? Check which terms are most commonly used, identified in the academic field that you're writing for, and make sure to use synonyms so as not to overuse the same words. We have talked about it. And you have to organize your writing logically. So, a third aspect of formal tone is organizing your writing in a logical and coherent way. Use clear and concise sentences that expresses one main idea. Use transitions and connections to link your sentences and paragraphs. Use headings and subheadings to divide your writing into sections and subsections. Use an introduction, a body, and a conclusion to structure your writing. Use a thesis statement to state your main argument or claim. Use topic sentences to introduce each paragraph. Use evidence and analysis to support your points. Use citations, references to acknowledge your sources. So next one is you have to proofread and edit your writing. So a final aspect of formal tone is proofreading and editing your writing before submitting it. Proofreading means checking your writing for errors in spelling, grammar, punctuation, and formatting. Editing means revising for clarity, coherence, consistency in style. You can use tools such as spell checkers, grammar checkers, or online dictionaries to help you with proofreading and editing. However, you should also read your writing aloud, ask for feedback from others, or use a professional service to ensure the quality of your writing. By following these tips and strategies, you can write with a formal tone in academic writing that reflects your knowledge, skills, and respect for your field and audience. Formal English is mainly used in writing. This style is academic in tone and is commonly used in academic textbooks, most university essays, business letters. In the case of speaking, formal English is usually only used for official or serious occasions. For example, in preparing for IELTS exam, or to formally welcome guests at university graduation ceremony. Formal English uses more complex vocabulary than everyday speech. So, for example, it uses many bigger words that aren't normally used in conversation. Examples are multi-syllable words like compensate, assent, and interrogate. So it also prefers one-part verbs, example, establish instead of simpler phrasal verbs, set up. Slang and colloquial vocabulary are avoided. When formal English is used in writing, sentences tend to be long and complex, and grammar rules are followed strictly. It tends to be impersonal or neutral, often using impersonal pronouns like it and passive verbs. Contracted and abbreviated forms of words are usually avoided. So, there are some rules for formal writing. There are certain things that can be done in spoken English or in written English in newspapers, magazines, or lecture notes or web pages, which are not appropriate for formal writing. So formal English follow rules of grammar very strictly. Sentences tend to be longer and more complex. The vocabulary tends to be elevated using big words and avoiding colloquial or slang vocabulary. It avoids split infinitives and prepositions at the end of sentences. So in formal English, you have to be aware of the followings. Don't start a sentence with and, also, but, so, or even so. Instead, use in addition, however, hence, consequently, alternately, nevertheless. Don't start a sentence with therefore. Instead, write, for example, we therefore. Don't start a sentence with then or now unless it is command. Don't use don't or many other shortened negatives such as isn't, hasn't, wasn't, etc. Use does not, is not, etc. instead. Don't use these signs. It's also very unusual to see questions in a paper. Don't put questions in a paper unless you really know what you are doing. Avoid using a personal or conversational style. Therefore, never use colloquial English for slang. Colloquial English is a type of informal English, and it includes words such as gonna, wanna, and phrases such as and, nothing, and etc. Dictionaries usually mark colloquial words and phrases with a label like colloq. Because colloquial English and slang are usually spoken rather than written, they'll make your academic writing sound too conversational and so less credible. Although It's usually to contract words in spoken and informal written English. Example, can't, won't, shouldn't, and hasn't, etc. It's better to avoid using any contractions in your academic essay. Avoid abbreviating words in academic writing. Don't say YRS, for example, and which stands for the original Latin examples. For example, or IE, which stands for the original Latin. And instead, write the words in full using their English equivalents. Years, for example, and that is, and etc. It's usually easy to decide if a word is informal or formal. Informal words are those common, ordinary, and familiar words that people use every day, whereas formal words tend to be the more serious and less frequently used words. Often, formal words are longer than informal words. Single word verbs are also usually more formal, and their phrasal verbs are equivalents. For instance, saying something is enormous is formal, but saying it's whooping is informal. Phrase like on the one hand is indicated above are formal, but phrases like by the way or that reminds me are informal. Note that some informal words are more formal than other informal words. The informal verb understand, for example, is more formal than the informal verb get. However, both are less formal than the formal verb comprehend.